Hey, everybody, welcome to the challenge. I am John Chapman, the voice of one crying in the wilderness. It is good to be with you today on the podcast. We've got a guest who's going to be joining us today. We're going to be talking about guns. We're going to be talking about gun laws. We're going to be talking about teachers, school districts, and protecting children, and some other interesting things too. As you stay tuned in this too, it's always a target-rich environment when government is doing things. So that's going to be good. Thanks for joining us today for today's live podcast with the challenge. Joining us in studio today is my brother Glenn. Glenn, how you doing today?
Good. It's awesome being with you guys.
Oh, brother, it's good to have you with. And I'm looking forward to our conversation on this too. I know we follow this stuff quite a bit, and it's very interesting. And so, I recently here in the state of Iowa, and if you could tell people where you're coming from, because every state, and I find this interesting, I understand more and more how each state has its own ability to govern. And so, just for the listeners too, where are you coming from today, bro?
I'm coming from Rockford, Illinois. Illinois, affectionately called the People's Republic of Illinois because of all of its amazing freedoms and things that are going on there. But yeah, Rockford, Illinois, definitely Illinois has some different stuff going on than what
Yeah,
Iowa has. It's not positive.
and we're going to get I really do. We're going to take a chance to take some time to touch on that too. Um, we well, as a matter of fact, that if you don't mind, I kind of wouldn't mind starting with this because I know that we're going to be talking about here in the state, Glenn, and I know it's different in Illinois for you guys a little bit. Here in the state of Iowa, of course, we've had the shooting several months ago out in Perry, Iowa, and so that activates, of course, the conversation about guns, and then people's perception of protecting children and things like that. And here in the
Right.
state, we have our governor has now passed into law allowing schools to train, and this is of their own choosing, but allowing them to train teachers and certain staff to be able to be armed, and it won't be known who they are for having a more direct line of protection should a shooter enter into into the classroom. So,
Mhm.
do they have anything like this going on in Illinois?
Oh heavens, no! Illinois would have none of this. I mean, but that's kind of the way the state is. They're not at all on board with the safety of the general population, and that'd be enough information for another 3 or 4 hour show. So I won't bore you with the details there. But no, we certainly don't have anything like that. They have no safety protocol or measures put into the public school system really at all throughout the whole state. I know some counties have tried to make some adjustments, but statewide, no, nothing like what you have there in Iowa.
Right. And we see this as a major move, and we were talking about this a little before broadcast too. So here we have something that seems like a major move, and because we've kind of been like you guys, we've been dancing around the edges of this, and we think we're never going to be touched by it until we were touched by it. And
Right.
so it's interesting to me that when we're talking about making the educational place, especially the public school system, a safe place for kids to be or for receiving education, um, it's interesting to me that we always talk about take the gun away, but there's never been anything really employed to set that in protection. I mean, you can have an officer there in the school present, but that's also up to the school. But what
Right.
else is going on here that we would have to make this law when it would seem it's a fundamental right? But what if a teacher wants to carry anyway? And why would that be an issue in the first place? So are we overdoing, in your opinion, Glenn? Are we over in this state, Iowa? Are we overdoing what shouldn't be necessary in the first place?
Well, in my opinion, I think so. I mean, I think at the Supreme Court level, that's been talked about several times about the right to bear arms, and like Illinois, all these states want to put in a contingency, which is, well, you've got the right to bear arms, except, and then they cite the scenario, and eventually, when you start going down that path, like Illinois, everything is a scenario that you can't bear arms. If you're a concealed carry person in the state of Illinois, you could almost can't go to Chicago legally because of all the
Man,
local statutes and rules in Chicagoland and some other places, Cook County in particular, that have steep restrictions on what you can do. And again, the Supreme Court has ruled on this, a couple of years ago in particular, said you can't really do that. So now the question becomes, okay, if that's the case, then what is going on here? And you'll get some very interesting dialogue. I can tell you from Illinois that they say, well, we're just trying to keep things safe. Well, don't go to Chicago then, because it's one of the most unsafe cities in the world and with
right.
some of the most gun restrictive places anywhere. So obviously that's not the case, and we've demonstrated this out with data for the 20 plus years that I've been here. So something else is clearly going on. And I agree with you. Yeah, it should be a fundamental right anyway. But the fact that Iowa has taken steps to integrate this in such a way that the public knows about it, the teachers can sign up for something like this, because they're protecting their own lives as well, not just the students. I mean, if some knucklehead comes in the classroom and starts doing it and becomes an active shooter, it's going to be way too late to have someone come and help you. You've got to be the guy on the spot.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely right. And as has happened here in Perry, Glenn, that there was several students that died, and to be commended, the principal came in, and when nobody's armed, the principal came in and started talking to the gunman, and then was shot himself, and
Wow.
he survived a few days, but then he did die.
Yep.
And you so what's what happens then is this conversation begins, and we all use the buzzwords, right? We want your kids to be safe. All right, what does that mean? Does anybody say we want your kid to be protected? I mean, everybody wants everybody to be safe, but what
Right.
is it actually going to take to protect? I mean, in my home, I want everybody to be safe, but
Right.
if something happens outside of what is reasonable or more forceful, well, then we need to have the conversation. What is it going to mean to protect? And that's a conversation people have been running from because, and it's obvious because people just start talking about guns, the danger of guns, the danger of guns, the danger of
Yep.
guns. And even in Iowa's discussion, there was a public school teacher who, again, they're torn because, well, I'm advocating that we need to protect the children. And one of the teachers said, but I could not kill the gunman or gunwoman because they are a student. And
Yeah.
to me, that says you don't want safety. If you're not willing, like this principal, if I can say, the principal put at least himself in between one of the victims
Yeah.
and the shooter.
Wow.
And if you're going to say, well, I'm not willing to shoot the shooter, we now live in a society that doesn't really believe there's right or wrong, or good or
Right.
evil, or righteousness or unrighteousness. That's all been washed out. And so instead, and I got to tell you, we've been living in Des Moines for quite a while now. I even get tired of the conservatives talking about it. We got a couple of conservative talk shows around here on the radio that I got to say, they sometimes sound just as foolish. They'd rather talk about it than actually solve the problem. So we start talking about, well,
Right.
mental illness. Oh, well, okay.
Yep.
Um, People experience that. And I've gone through tough times in my life too. Doesn't necessarily, but okay, talk about mental illness, but back to protecting children. Yeah, but do you see
Right.
what was, and so here we are. So now we have some action. Some action has been taken, and this
Right.
is in place. And it's actually pretty overwhelming too. So here we have it, and from the Des Moines Register itself, off of their own article on this, Glenn. And I don't know. I would be interested to see if Illinois has ever polled on what they would think about the population. The Des Moines Register Mediacom Iowa poll, actually conducted in February of this year, found that 60% of Iowans favored allowing teachers and other staff to carry firearms in schools after completing
Wow.
training.
Yep.
And it says 38% opposed and 1% was not sure. Well, it tells me there's hope in the community
Yeah.
because everybody else is
Yeah.
going, no, it's time for it to get stopped. And so we're seeing a swing that way. And to me, that's hopeful.
Right. I agree.
Yeah, yep. We and you said there would be contingencies in the state of Illinois. And
Right.
and you're right. It's practically, yeah. The federal government, you have the right to bear arms, regulated militia. You can own armament. It is for your protection. Primarily, it's for your defense against the government overextending itself. And
Right. Exactly.
here's a yeah, yeah. And so here's a case when we're talking about protecting kids. Now in Illinois, do you hear things? Do you follow the news at all? Is there gun violence relatively often or not so often in Illinois? And I know you got Chicago over there to draw from. So
Right. Well, the ironic thing is the areas with the most restrictions typically have the most gun violence.
hmm.
Um, we had a situation in Rockford just several weeks ago that made national news. We had some guy on the south side of town in broad daylight just decide to break into people's houses and stab a bunch of people.
Oh my.
He killed a mail carrier. He killed a mom and her son. Broke in and killed another guy. Injured several others. So yeah, it's the when you talk about gun violence, it's they add the gun to it to make sure that everyone thinks that the gun just hopped off the shelf and is running around shooting people.
Right.
Rather than saying, there's a terrorist or a murder on the loose, murder violence or death violence, or call it what it actually is. But that's one of the tricks that governments play is they use words that don't really apply.
Right.
You don't hear about, a guy that's got a domestic assault going on is fist violence or, you know, crowbar violence or all that kind of stuff. It's a heart condition, and we're unfortunately coming on a group of people in the United States that have grown up with the notion you're not accountable for anything that you do, and so therefore you can do anything. Then we expose them to a situation in Illinois where the public schools don't do anything to train these kids to survive in the world, and then introduce them to weapons, gangs, and drugs.
Right.
And this is what you get. You stir that cauldron together, and this is what you get. And so for anybody anywhere, and we've had this discussion, believe me, in Illinois, the churches around here, when I've gone to several meetings where we've gone through safety clinics with some very talented law enforcement officers that train this kind of stuff. They're very bright guys. This is not the Wild West. It's just that if you want to protect yourself, this is how you do it. But in Illinois, we're under no illusion that violence couldn't come up to your doorstep at any time. And unfortunately, people like what I'm hearing about in your discussion with the Iowa folks, I don't know what makes them think that it can't happen. And so then if it does, that has to be the bigger concern. If and when it does, which is likely the case, how do we protect as many people as possible? And it sounds like I was really trying to do that.
No, I would agree. And I would, there's nobody that hopes this theory will be put to test. But like you said, it is the
Right,
places in the city that withdraw and say there's not a defense mechanism where most of that crime happens. This is one of the best
right,
deterrents ever. And again, the other problem with that is when you have opposition to it, and then you use protests, and I see youth protests. And I don't
right.
mind youth protests, but what I do not like, and I got to tell you too, I've seen it. I've seen it on both sides of the aisle where they bring in young children and
Yep,
have the young children kind of quote unquote school us adults on
yep.
what needs to happen. And I got to tell you that horse hockey has got to stop. Uh,
I agree.
because nobody takes away that these young adults will have an opinion, but for that opinion to be formulated to change formidable policy for the responsible
Right,
adult level, well, that's almost unforgivable. Any party that would put youthfulness out there and say, "Hey," and you hear them in their emotional rants, it's time for us to do something about guns, which means they're not old enough to have the debate. You know what I'm saying? They're not old
exactly.
enough to have the discussion because they think that's the issue. And if I
Right.
could, I want to draw back to this a little bit. Glenn, one of the things you said is we were talking about a heart issue, right?
Hmm.
We know, you and I know very factually, crime happens from people.
Yep.
And something enters into a person and a crime activity occurs. And when we don't have an accountable society or anybody who's being held responsibly, it's because and I have to say, I think we're coming away from, I think we're seeing a repercussion of what we would call godless. Because to believe in God is to immediately believe in the highest level of accountability. Like something's going to go down. if you go against him.
Right.
And if you remove
Right.
him, you go, well, nobody's accountable and there's no that nobody's at fault. And then you leave people running
Right.
around trying to change policy to try to deal with, well, it's nobody's fault. And but here's what we're going to do about it, which actually doesn't protect anybody because there's no accountability. And so here we have. So when you said, this is a heart issue, what do you see as being one of the things that has entered into our societal living that would allow us to ignore the fact that this is a hard issue inside of people to do crime?
Well, I mean, again, this could be another 3-hour show just because there's so much information along that very line, and I certainly don't have all the answers. But what's fairly clear is if you take a person that misbehaves and you give him positive things as a result of that misbehavior, or you tell him that that action is fine, or just going to get your hand slapped, like we do in Illinois, we passed a law here this last year that we're letting hardened criminals out. And it
Right.
doesn't take long to realize that these guys are going to get back involved with when the crime that they're involved in the first place. But if we're to go back 40 or 50 years, and I'm sure our guys would agree with this, you've already got a notion in the schools is kind of where it started, but also in the family that there is no God. That's all nonsense. Science has disproven that. Therefore, morality is relative.
Right.
And even though your conscience still bothers you, which is a God built in thing, and our forefathers understood that. In fact, they were concerned if America ever got to a place where our conscience wouldn't bother us. If your conscience still bothers you, the government supplies plenty of people in your socioeconomic area to say, no, you're just fine. This is the way it is now. And eventually that conscience diminishes till it almost doesn't exist. And so that's how you see a guy running around stabbing people all day long in Rockford, Illinois. He doesn't think twice about it.
Right.
He really doesn't think twice. And people think that these people don't exist, but they certainly do for a lot of reasons. And so you can talk to this guy all day long, but eventually, and this is even a biblical, possibility as well, they've crossed the thresholds where they're so far from God in the way they want to be that anything goes, that all's fair. And we're seeing this in society really throughout.
Yes. Yep. And the other thing I think, Glenn, that when we see that separation happen, where there isn't that accountability, nobody's wrong, and so this is just allowable. The other thing is that who in the world gets to be the ultimate morality? Who in the world gets to develop the absolute?
Right.
Who gets to do the protecting them? Where does that come from? And you have thinking
Right.
that is so far outside the box, is that people that don't believe that we came from an intelligent being also believe that over the next 30 billion years we're going to become the most intelligent being. And
Right.
if that is not the craziest religious notion there is of an excuse, right? That's an
Yeah.
excuse to not deal with our lives in the now. So if you believe that, you're really not going to be on board with protecting children because, and here's why I think it's because if you don't believe there's any right or wrong, you don't believe there's any right either.
Right.
And because of that,
Yep. Whatever makes you strongest is the best.
that's exactly right. And the proof of, and when you talk about the consciousness of people, when you have a conscience, this is this built-in thing of God. The scripture, even the Bible talks about that when people insist on doing wrong, there's a time where God turns them over to the hardness of their own heart, and their
Yep.
conscience and their
Yep.
heart have become seared, is the term. They get burned up. They lose the sense. They don't have the feeling anymore of what's right.
Right.
And so then on top of that, if you demonize God-fearing people, AKA especially the Christian group of thought, when you demonize them, you're silencing those people that have a conscience. Undoubtedly, generally, it's
Right.
those people that say, you know what, you might not believe there's wrong, but I believe there's right. And it's that moral sense inside those people that will step up and protect. They will say, they would be willing to stop, even if somebody they loved, they would be willing to stop by shooting them, an individual who was a student, so that they would not
Right.
kill 5, 10, 15, 20 other people. And so you see that
Right.
the teachers themselves are struggling with a moral challenge. And so I digress, but not
Agreed.
really. It's true. And so, here's what happened, Glenn. I really think this is interesting. So Governor Kim Reynolds has signed this into law. And again, one of the things I enjoy, I don't agree with everything she's done, but I really enjoy that she always lets our freedom be in place. And so she keeps the
Yeah,
localized
that's for
government.
sure.
What she's saying, hey, you can train people to do this. This is lawful in the state of Iowa, but you, as a school district, because you're local, have the authority to do this. So, bro, I'm coming in to the office today, and I'm listening to the news, and they're declaring this. And then on the end of this news report, this is the list, and I'm gonna say it out loud because this little local community, we need to hear this. And I'm going to tell you, these are the school districts that are not interested in saving your child's life when a legitimate threat walks through the door. Here's the school districts. They scream for answers. They demonize freedom and guns, and now they won't participate in protecting children. Johnston, Ankeny, Des Moines, West Des Moines, Southeast Polk. Now, these are the big ones that were listed in this, and I'm pretty sure there's going to be more.
Wow.
These are the biggest districts in the Des Moines area. And
Wow.
when I heard that, I thought, have we lost all sense and sensibility in these schools to actually see? Glenn, I struggle with the idea of really, even if it's on the left side, I'm not entirely in agreement with the thought that they're only purely politically motivated because they are a person
Yeah.
and they have some
Yeah.
ideas. It's good to have public discourse, and I always want to hear that. But to hear this of all of these districts coming together, I thought, you got to be kidding me. You're literally choosing then your political fears just to oppose. So you're willing to take a risk for the children. And so this is where I thought, Glenn, how can we keep a school accountable then when the law says you can train people that will stop this? And if we watch over the next 10, 15, 20 years how this begins to curb this kind of violence or even save lives, I want to know what are we going to do to keep these school districts? Who's going to be accountable to this? And how do we do that?
Well, it's we're seeing a little bit of it in Illinois, quite a bit of it in Chicago. And this is maybe the easiest answer on planet Earth, but so few people do it. You don't put your kid in harm's way,
Right.
which means if schools aren't going to stand up and say, hey, listen, we're going to protect your kids in the best way possible, even using a firearm if necessary, okay, I'll consider it. But if the Des Moines community and all the parents just said, okay, great, until you put this in place, our kids aren't going there.
Right.
We'll go to a school, we'll go to homeschool, we'll do whatever we need to do, but our kids aren't going there. The problem would be solved in less than a week.
Right. Right. I mean,
But
yeah.
at the same time, you could approach the school and say, okay, so this is your position. What if my child is killed? Who's liable?
Right. Right.
Who is it? Is it the superintendent? Is it the school board? Is it who is it? Because somebody will be held to an account if that happens. Unfortunately, that step might be necessary, but if like a lot of the Chicago schools, a lot of people are just not sending their kids to public anymore, and thousands of families are finding alternative educational routes. And it sounds like the Des Moines area, that would be a big signal to the schools. We're not happy with you. The schools, this just gets my goat. For some reason, they think that they're the new surrogate parent in this new socialized world. So we're going to tell you what your kids are going to know and how to know it. We're going to tell you what success and failure is for your kid. And we're going to tell you if your kid lives or dies
Right.
in our school because we want to take corrective action.
Right. Right. And they obviously they vote based on no sense of accountability. Because
Oh, totally.
along with the House File in Iowa, the House File 2586, which is the law that allows districts to arm employees and qualified employees in training, and they're instituting training. I mean, even that's above and beyond. I
Absolutely.
mean, it's already lawful. It's already lawful for a teacher to walk in conceal right now in the state of Iowa. It's lawful. And if the school
Yeah.
district wants to make a stink out of it, they're going to have to deal with it there. But the federal government says this can happen. And
Yeah.
so they are also then had to put into this the file 2586 is immunity for teachers who would offer protection through lethal force. And so then they are, as
Right.
long as they are found to be reasonable in their force, they cannot be
Yep.
sued. So,
Right.
what is it with the school boards when all these big major schools get on board and say, "Oh, we're not going to allow those guns in"? Oh, really? Shouldn't we be allowed to sue the board for the lives of
Absolutely.
children that then die if somebody walks in there with a gun and shoots somebody in their district? That board, those members of the board that voted to stop the protection should go to prison.
And all of their names should be made public.
Yes.
All of their names. Everybody on all these school boards that just decide, hey, we know best. We're going to stop this from happening. You need to find the teachers in these school districts, and there's plenty of them out
Yeah.
there that say, yeah, we'd really like to participate in this. Get them together, find out who these school board members' names are, and get them out to the public. That's another thing that bothers me about school boards. They think they don't have to answer to the public.
Right.
So they're putting you in a situation that's unwinnable, and then they say, "Well, we're not responsible." And as you know, if you go to any school board meeting, they'll just stop your mic
Yep.
if you even try to express any concern.
Yep. Yep.
So to say that the whole school system, and by that I mean the school board at the top, clear to the Department of Education at the very top, do not have your best interest in mind as far as the children go. And that kind of stuff needs to be addressed with accountability. Unless that happens, this will just be the normal course of action.
Yeah. Yeah. And our society is no longer structured on accountability. Even people of
None at all.
even church going people, Christian people, they don't even believe in any level of accountability. I'm gonna
No,
skew this way. The hope of the message that is preached in what is the gospel, people really believe they're not being saved from being eternally accountable to their actions. And even once saved, there's
no.
accountability that is proven that it's going to occur after death for the things that you did or didn't do at that point. And so we are really a debased society that just does what we want, when we want, however we want, thinking we're not going to be held accountable. And then when people
I've
want
got
people to be accountable,
I've
they
got
don't
a
hold them. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I've got a quote right along those lines if you want to
Please,
hear it.
please bring it.
I posted this on Facebook, so I think Judy chimed in. She thought it was
Nice.
interesting. This guy that did the quote is part of the Discovery Institute, which is the intelligent design crowd. They're the guys showing that science tends towards intelligent
Yes.
design. And he claims to be agnostic. God bless him. I pray for him. His name's David Berlinski. And here's his quote. For this is a book called The Devil's Delusion, Atheism and Its Scientific Pretensions. David Berlinski is his quote. What Hitler did not believe, and what Stalin did not believe, and what Mao did not believe, what the SS did not believe, and what the Gestapo did not believe, and what the NKVD did not believe, and what the commissars, functionaries, swaggering executioners, Nazi doctors, Communist Party theoreticians, intellectuals, brown shirts, black shirts, Gaultiers, and 1,000 party hacks did not believe was that God was watching what they were doing. And as far as we can tell, very few of those carrying out the horrors of the 20th century worried over much that God was watching what they were doing either.
Mm.
That is, after all, the meaning of a secular society.
That I mean that is so true. You can't look back, and you're saying this guy's Gnostic.
Yep. Self-proclaimed agnostic. So I'll leave it at that. And I really enjoy his material.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you have to at some point you got to look at the results. You have to look at what's happening and then you have to look at the result. And then you have to say, is the thing that is happening causing a result? And it's the point we as a society and people, it's at the point where we go, well, no, it's something else. Or it's another problem, or it's a different problem, or if it's a different thing. This is the runaround we deal with. And even though I believe in the form of government in which we have in the United States of America, is strained as it is, this is the circle we begin to run around in. This creates the Darth Vaders of the world. We can't stand the circular motion of non-result. And but we as people, loving people loved by a loving God, have to let that result be His. But in the meantime, we have a job to do down here, which includes protecting the innocent, protecting the lives of these children. And I'm gonna from the Register again. There's an interesting statement here. I thought they did a pretty good job in the article. Generally, I'm pretty critical and of the Register, admittedly, and sometimes unapologetically. But I think they've written some of this article out pretty well, and I appreciate that where they're coming from. One of the things stated in this article in regards to this, Glenn, is it says Democrats and gun violence prevention groups say it will make students in schools and employees less safe by increasing the likelihood of gun accidents in schools. And that is to put guns in trained teachers' hands. So they're saying this will increase
Right.
the risk of that. And it goes on to say a 2023 report from the Giffords Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence documented about 100 incidents of guns being mishandled, left in the reach of children, or accidentally discharged at schools over the last 5 years. You got to look at that statistic right there, and so they're saying, hey, it's riskier to put guns in the hands of the teachers. But from this report, of which it authorizes or reviews or reports zero injuries and zero deaths.
Hmm.
So they're only recording incidents of a gun being wrongfully handled, which means nothing's happened except for somebody didn't hold it right. Was in
Right.
the reach of a child, but it doesn't mean a child reached for it. It was just found in a spot that a kid could have got, or accidentally discharged at a school. Well, discharge means
Right.
a round left the chamber, but it didn't strike anybody.
Yep.
And so you're actually admitting that over the last 5 years, the Democrat and violent prevention groups are incorrect. And yet it's reported as being viable
Right.
feed or pushback to this. When you consider the lives that were lost in one shooting in Perry, they're saying, well, the no lives that were lost in 5 years is a better reason not to keep guns there. And that's just that's ludicrous at the highest levels of trying to justify this. It's politics at the worst feet.
But that's not an uncommon tactic. Unfortunately, truth doesn't help them very
Right.
often. So they come up with all this amazing stuff that just doesn't apply.
Yep.
And then they try to jam it down everybody's throats. And it just, there's all kinds of other, things in a survey and things like that where you can find out extenuating
Right.
circumstances that they don't include in these as well. That's like saying, well, there would be fewer violent deaths in the police department if the law enforcement officers didn't have guns.
Right.
Well, maybe not. Now the criminals all do and the law enforcement doesn't. It's just that the people getting shot are the good guys, and that's what the issue is
Yes.
here. That's the whole problem.
Yes. No, that's exactly
The criminals have already crossed that line where, hey, I don't care about life and freedom and your freedom or your life, so I've crossed that line. I'm sorry. You're putting yourself in harm's way, and a teacher should be able to defend he or himself and the students that are under their
yeah.
charge.
Unquestionably. And this is coming from, and I know I go here at risk right at the moment because we're live. Who knows what social media is about to do? This is coming from people requiring children to not go to classroom in the event they, being the lowest
Right.
percentage of risk over a sickness or disease, cannot be together in a classroom. And the argument that I heard over and over and over and over from the left during the whole COVID thing was hey, it's worth it if we save just one, because just one death from the sickness is worth it. And yet here they are going, no, 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 no. Keep all these children at risk and don't put a more sure thing. It's like they said, take the vax and send all your children home. But here they're saying, send them all here and we're not going to protect them because that's what we think is right.
Exactly.
And there's a better
Exactly.
chance of a kid dying from a shooting in a school than there was anybody from the age of 3 to 18 dying greater. And but again, statistics apparently don't matter, or those scientific statistical facts don't matter to anybody. So it's interesting.
Nope.
We pray for our governorship here and the leadership here and all those, and likewise in the great state of Illinois, bro, and what's going on over there. And I find this interesting because now in contrast to this, I like to turn to this because you have said Illinois has recently put forth some legislation. When you shared this with me, I'm like, you got to be kidding me, because it's the opposite. And I want to talk about this today too, because we're really showing there's two different ideals of governances going on states that literally touch each
Uh-huh.
other. And I could drive over and have supper tonight in Illinois if I wanted to. But here's the difference.
Right. Right.
Yep.
You're
So
welcome.
here we're going, look, we want to protect the kids. And we want to do it by responsibly training people and letting people have the freedom to make decisions at their personal levels. Tell our listeners what
Right.
Illinois is doing right now.
Well, this just popped up in my news feed, and it's a significant thing for me because obviously I was actively involved with all the COVID-19 vaccine mandates that popped up in 2021, in particular 22 to a lesser degree. And so in Illinois, hopefully this gives your listeners a little understanding what it's like to live here in Illinois. So this new bill that went through the House, and I'm just going to read from the IllinoisPolicy.org.
Yeah.
If you're an Illinois resident, I highly, highly, highly recommend these guys. They are not biased. They're just simply an organization that kind of a watchdog to look to see what the government's doing at the state level and also the local level in Chicago. But so here's the article. I'll read. It's not very long. I'll read it briefly, but it's incredible. So Illinois lawmakers are considering a bill which would broaden powers for the Illinois Emergency Management Agency and its Office of Homeland Security. I bet you didn't know that Illinois had all that. Now you do.
Right.
Specifically, it, quote, provides that the agency shall do all things necessary, incidental, or appropriate for the implementation of the Illinois Emergency Management Agency Act. Senate Bill 3434 reads, State Senator Win Stoller, a Republican from Germantown Hills, said agencies such as IEMA would get broad powers under the bill. And his quote is, that's a lot of power that the department is looking for, and it begs the question, why is all that necessary? And Stoller added, it was mentioned in committee that sometimes you need to trust the department to do the right thing. If there's one thing that makes me nervous, it's when the government says, trust us. So I'm going to skip down the article for the interest of time. So this should give you a little flavor of what we are going through in Illinois through the whole COVID thing. So J.B. Pritzker,
You're
he's our
good on
governor,
time too, bro.
the
Yeah.
wealthiest politician in North America, by the way.
Whoa. Well, say that
The
again.
wealthiest
Say that
guy
again
in
about
North America.
your governor.
Yeah, Governor J.B. Pritzker is the wealthiest politician in North America by a factor of 10. He's worth about $3.8 billion and is part of the Hyatt hotel group. In fact, if you look at Bloomberg on this guy, he was one of the most privileged human beings in the world. He's done almost nothing to be a multi-billionaire compared to what other people have done in the business world to get that
Wow.
distinction. So under J.B. Pritzker in his first term, Illinoisans spent 1,155 days with emergency powers because of the COVID-19 pandemic, which expired in May 23. Each declaration was only intended to last 30
Oh,
days. But Pritzker kept extending the emergency on his own authority for more than 3 years without state lawmakers ever weighing in on the policies Pritzker was imposing.
wow.
So that's Illinois.
That is, if we could wrap our minds around this, and this is why when you talk about we the people, for the people, by the people, this is the absolute flip opposite of a
Mm-hmm.
government or state being run by its people. And I, I mean, we've had this conversation. Getting the already sinking Titanic to get turned around to get repaired in this country, I believe, is off the table. I really do. We got too many of our corridors already filled with political water that's drowning us so bad. And the level of deception
Right.
that's going on because, and I want to go back to this. You talked about the hearts of people is what causes people to do crime. And because the
Yep.
government, some churches, and many societal aspects that look at people would rather talk about the color of our skin than the content of our character. Much of those people would rather talk about what country we fled from than we would, yes, but what inside of you is going to cause you to do right while you're here. And this
Right.
very notion is so thrown out the door. We see it at the federal level now. I'm gonna touch on this just a little bit. So here you have, so you've got Illinois who's now getting ready. You said this is passed in the Senate, right? So it's got to go to the House for being challenged.
Yep.
And the idea here is what they're
Yep.
basically saying is look, we need all the authority. You need to just trust us because we're government.
Yep.
And it's like now all the money that's just been approved to spend outside of the United States of America, when it is known the quantity of people. I'm not speaking bad against people. I'm
Right.
speaking bad against policy. When the quantity of people both wanting to and wanting to destroy this country are flowing right in, and I don't think there was a dollar for that. And you,
No.
when you look at this, swimming out of this is going to be a kind of a non-factor or even impossible, very possible. I don't want people to lose hope because when you have God fearing content in your heart, then you always carry the hope. You always carry the hope of what can happen, which is why we're talking about right now, bro. This is why we're having the conversation right now. So that
Yep.
people not only hear this and go, man, I know what you're saying, I know what you're saying, but they go, you know what? There's something I need to be doing. And as much as I want to,
Oh,
absolutely,
yes.
absolutely. And I have to say, Glenn, the less I was ever involved, I had to look at myself and go, you know what? I don't think my heart is in a good spot because I'm not involving my speech
Mm,
or telling the truth of even what I think to a coworker, let alone try to get a hold of my senator. And if we're unwilling to talk about what we really believe, then this is just going to plow through because
mhm,
good intentioned people will get shot first before people who claim to hold the good. And the people who hold righteousness in their heart know, hey, this ain't right. This ain't up to the stink test of what's going on in my life.
mhm.
But then some sort of activity has to ensue. And this country is begging by its actions. Illinois and other legislatures and governorships, and there's plenty of Republicans who just haven't figured it out yet, too, at all. They are
I agree.
begging for the public to do something. They're begging for people who have righteousness in their hearts to do something. And I don't even know why they continue in the way that they do.
Well, and it's to add some perspective to that as well, because I agree with all the points you're making, and it's we just get complacent, we get lulled back into that sleep, right? There hasn't been COVID for a while, so what could possibly go wrong? Everyone's chilling out. So that data that I just gave you about the emergency act that Illinois wants to pass, which gives them the ability to spend money that they want to impose restrictions that they want to. So this all happened, like I read before, for 1,155 days. So the election comes up, and there was one guy that actually went against Pritzker. His name was Darren Bailey, and he won in court because the governor's not authorized to
Wow.
do this. So he wins in court and gets freedom for his district and areas around his district, and then runs against the governor for the governorship in 2022 of Illinois. And guess what? He loses. So Illinois amazingly lives under tyranny for almost 4
Yeah.
straight years. Jobs lost, people fleeing the state, the economy tanking, and guess what? Pritzker gets reelected miraculously. And if you look at the state of Illinois for that election in 2022, there's just a couple blue
Yep.
counties.
Yep.
Everything else is red. And so you can see why people get upset. But the one thing that Darren Bailey did when he stood up against the governor said, no, you don't have legal precedence to do
Right.
this. You can't just shut down everything all the time. And everyone that stood up and said, no, that you're breaking the law, you can't do that, they all won. They all won. And that started with the Romanian church in the city of
Right.
Chicago. They just said, no, we know what communism looks like.
That's
We're
right.
not doing this. We're staying open. You don't
That's
have to
right.
come.
That's right. And there's not one person.
But people just don't. And we just passively sit by and watch it happen, not aware at all what the laws are. But I can guarantee you in Illinois, 90% of the people know who's on the Bears football
Right.
team.
That's right. Well, and there's not, I don't have one friend who's a foreign international that has come from a war torn zone, lost family members in their front yard
Mm-hmm.
in mass graves. Not one of them is sitting there saying, "Oh, this is the way we love it. Bind us up, lock us down. This is the way we love it." They all see it. Every single one of them that ever came from a communist
Yes, they
nation
do.
and they came here to not be under that, they go, "We are under this." And they see it instantaneously.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little like in Russia this year. I know it's a shocker to everybody that Vladimir Putin, and it was a close one. It was a close one when that election went through because they're also a free republic with a democracy in place. It was just amazing. And so I'm on a family vacation in
Absolutely.
Scotland and I'm having the time of my life. I'm like, you know what? I'm in a peaceful place. There's cows with fur on them. They look like teddy bears. You could pet them. There is there is adult beverage of flavors I've never had in my life before. I'm going, and the people are everybody's like cheers. I mean, it doesn't matter. You walk, you talk to somebody, it's cheers, and I'm like, this is heaven, Lord. Is this heaven? And so you're living this life around a group of people. There's just it's fantastic. And 2 mornings before we come home, I'm enjoying breakfast with my family in the hotel lobby, and the BBC is declaring the narrow win of the Russian president who won by, it was so close,
Oh,
86%. 86% of the vote. So you talk about you
incredible.
being under tyranny. And this is what people look like. This is what a country looks like.
Yep.
You have tyranny walk in, you lie, you deceive, you extend your power for thousands of days. It's against even your own laws, and the
Yep.
people sit back and go, "Well, at least it's as good as it's going to be for us, and I don't want to stir the boat." And all the
Yep.
BBC could report was
Yep.
is how amazingly confident. They said it over and over. Won 86%. And they said, "Oh, Vladimir Putin, he just," and they kept saying it over and over. Look at how confident he is. Look at when he comes out to speak with the
Oh,
people to
bro.
accept his victory. Look at the confidence of this man. And I'm looking at the next two people who didn't even get 10% of the vote in this. And like, I'm thinking,
Yeah.
BBC, you're not asking the right questions. And saying Putin looks confident is an
Yeah.
understatement when this guy has ensured his own victory most assuredly. And so it sounds like Illinois and
Ooh,
Russia,
without a
maybe
doubt.
maybe cut from the same cloth. I don't know. It's looking,
I'd say
it is,
very much so. Definitely the
it
same
is, it
template.
is. So, from a fundamental standpoint, Glenn, what do you see us as families, us as citizens, from townships to cities to districts? What might be, as we're kind of winding it down here? What might be one thing, maybe two, that you would go, this is what we need to do as a free society to encourage a change that is necessary for the literal protection of people, literal freedoms of people, and actual freedom functioning of governance as this country is designed to flow.
Well, I experienced it. I experienced it like nothing I've ever experienced in my lifetime during the COVID, particularly 2021, 22, when the mandatory vaccines were coming. What we realized was in the airline world that nobody was going to stand up for us. There was nobody that was going to represent the freedom that
Yeah.
we have as Americans under the Constitution. Nobody. Not the federal government, not the state government, not the local government, nobody. And so we had to do it ourselves. And so to represent ourselves, we just said no.
Right.
And that's as hard. That's as hard as it is. No, we're not. We're not doing this. And you can try to function without us, and good for you. And then the fascinating thing that I found when this happened is the people that I interacted with in about an 18-month period of time. People from all over North America. Um, People that you wouldn't probably see me hanging out with regularly were coming out of the scene work because they knew that their freedoms were
Mm.
being violated. The Christian community came out, and they were all almost universally the type of people that were involved in trying to push back legally, but doing it calmly and peacefully and helping others in the best way that they possibly could in their communities. But it was definitely a model for how Americans can behave when their government has gone rogue. And in Illinois, we know that's the way it's going to be from now on. If you got a guy, a tyrant that's destroyed all this business and taken all this freedoms in 4 years,
Yep.
gets reelected, yeah, it's Putin all over again.
Yep.
It's Putin 2.0. So we know that the only thing we can do, and this is parents that have students in school, this is situations where they say, well, you have to get a shot or else you're getting fired. It could
Yep.
cost you something. But if you're in a good group of Christian brothers and sisters and you're being discipled and you pray for each other and you lift each other up and all of you just say, no, we need some accountability. We're not going to go this route peacefully. I would
Yep.
emphasize peacefully. God can do his thing just by praying. I was shocked to see what changed. I mean, the whole dialogue, the whole narrative of who's going to get this shot
Yes.
dramatically changed in about a 6-week period. And it was because of a bunch of clowns like me were just saying,
Yep.
no, we're not doing
Yep.
it.
I would agree. And I'm going to let that be the word that's left with us today in the podcast. And I really appreciate everybody joining us in the midst of this. I want to thank you, Glenn, for being a part of this conversation. And thank you so much for, yes, and we're
Oh,
going to
my
do
pleasure.
this in the future, unquestionably. And I want to encourage everybody that as we continue, as you continue in your life, there's no reason to get mad at somebody, but there's every reason in the world that you have that when you disagree with somebody, simply say no. The answer would be no. And from that standpoint, you just might be surprised at how far you can go in drawing people together and actually having your knowledge of why something else is wrong. You can smile at somebody and say no. And that, I believe, is going to bring about, and like you said, you've seen it, everything that we need in this country is people speaking exactly what they think, not being afraid of the repercussion, not being afraid of the opinions of the person that might disagree with them, but just saying no. Glenn, thanks for joining us today. I want to thank our producer producing this program today, and you can join us at whitedoveministries.net. You're going to be able to find us on YouTube, Rumble, and various places there. Hope you're able to join us and look forward to you being able to join us in the future. God bless. Have a great week, and we'll see you next. Love you too. See you, bro.
Love you guys.